Welcome to Live at the Lab. Today we're diving into a topic that can feel confusing, but is critical for anyone interested in health: metabolism. Not just the number on the scale, but how your body processes fuel, burns fat, and keeps muscle. We're exploring metabolic synchronization, our new breakthrough science that reverses metabolic dysfunction at the cellular level. To break this down and clear up the science, today we're joined by Satya Jonnalagadda, our Vice President of Scientific and Clinical Affairs. She'll walk us through the latest research, what it really means for body composition, and why muscle, fat, and timing all matter. Whether you're curious about how to support your metabolism or just want to understand the science behind healthy changes, this episode is for you. So let's dive in. So, my first question: what is metabolic synchronization?
Great question. First, I have to say metabolic synchronization is a proprietary term. It's evidence based, based on the science that we have been focused on as it relates to metabolic health. So, metabolic synchronization first is it's about reverse addressing the root cause of metabolic dysfunction. So, it's leveraging our science from our clinical studies. It's addressing how we can help individuals go from metabolic dysfunction towards metabolic health. And in this regard, metabolic synchronization is the foundation. It's the foundation for us as we think about the future, as future opportunities for us to address metabolic dysfunction and help individuals improve their metabolic health. So, metabolic synchronization fundamentally is focused on three key pillars to help reverse that metabolic dysfunction. The first one is about reducing that bad fat, which we call, which is also known as visceral fat.
Okay.
So, this visceral fat is fat that you find around the organs. And when you have too much visceral fat, that disrupts the functioning of the different organs. So that's the first pillar of metabolic synchronization. The second pillar of metabolic synchronization is about preserving or retaining lean mass. Lean mass is an important aspect of metabolic synchronization with regards to helping maintain, because when you retain lean mass, you're also preserving muscle. More than 50% of lean mass is muscle. By preserving that lean mass and protecting that healthy muscle, you're supporting healthy metabolism
Yeah.
and thereby helping individuals in terms of their metabolic health. So, what we found from our clinical study was that we were able to reduce visceral fat by 14%. And that's very important when we think about reversing metabolic dysfunction. Because visceral fat is a very active fat in the sense that it contributes to metabolic dysfunction. It increases inflammation in the body, or as I like to call it, the fire within your body, and it disrupts many functions of the body as for example how the body regulates your blood glucose levels and insulin levels, how the body regulates blood lipids, and so it contributes to metabolic dysfunction. So by decreasing that visceral fat, we are able to help reverse that metabolic dysfunction. In our clinical study, we saw that we were able to retain 98% of lean mass. And as I said, lean mass, more than 50% of lean mass is muscle. And muscle is a very active, metabolically active tissue. And so by retaining lean mass and protecting the healthy muscle, we're supporting active metabolism. So all of these together help protect and reset metabolic health and help reverse metabolic dysfunction.
So, going back to the clinical study, in simple terms, can you walk us through what that looked like?
Yeah, so we do nutrition and health research in many different ways.
Hmm.
There's primary research and secondary research. So when we plan a clinical study, that is considered a primary research. So we have a very defined question that
Okay.
we're trying to address and find the answer to. So this particular clinical study that we did was with the 5-on-1 plan to look at the effect of the 5-in-1 plan, the comprehensive plan, and its effect on not only weight loss but the other health outcomes.
Okay.
So in our clinical study, it has to be very carefully designed.
Yeah.
We have very specific regulatory and scientific requirements that we have to follow when we do a clinical study. So our clinical study followed the gold standards of clinical research, meaning that everything was very well controlled. We It was a had to be a certain duration. Our clinical study had to be 16 weeks because of the requirements, and we emulated everything that happens with our comprehensive approach. So the program, plan, and products was similar to what our coaches and clients
Yeah.
use. And so we emulated the coaching, we emulated the community support along with the nutrition meal plans. And as part of the 16-week study, not only did we look at measurements related to body weight, but we also measured waist circumference, we measured body composition, and other health and well-being questionnaires were completed. And so during the course of the study, we collected many outcomes, health-related outcomes.
So I want to know, what is the difference between a clinical study and just testing something on a few people and seeing what happens? I think I know the answer, but if you could please explain, that would be great.
Yeah, that's a great question. A clinical study, one of the gold standards, it has to be randomized.
Yeah.
The reason that you have to randomize is because you want to make sure that the outcomes that you're seeing, the health outcomes that you're
Hmm.
measuring, are not due to fluke.
Okay.
They're actually happening
Yeah.
in what you're studying, and so that's the reason why the clinical study has to have a certain number of people. Measurements have to be done in a specific way, and everything has to be randomized and controlled. Whereas if you're just testing out in a few people, random people, or even random people, but a small 5 people, you don't know if those results are going to be valid across
Okay.
the general population. So you always have to make sure that you're selecting the right individuals to study, you have the right number of individuals in the study, the right
Yeah.
duration, and all of the validate approved outcome measurements that you're doing.
Makes sense. So definitely sounds like a lot more thought and effort than just a study of a couple random people. So
Correct.
congratulations on completing that. That
Thank you.
is must be a huge accomplishment for you and your team. Okay, so going back to the clinical study, we are seeing a ton of stats and we're bringing back up the clinical study that has been done. So, what kind of made you and your team revive all this data and information?
That's a great question. Um, Science continues to evolve.
Yeah.
And that's one of our core responsibilities as members of the scientific and clinical affairs team. My team is constantly looking at the scientific evidence that that is evolved coming out from many different entities, including ourselves, and we're constantly trying to understand what's going on in health.
Hmm.
And one of the trends, although obesity has been an epidemic for a long
Yeah.
time and has been a concern, public health concern, one of the things that we saw was that metabolic health and poor metabolic health was becoming a growing concern. A recent study from N. Haynes that was sponsored by the CDC showed that more than 90% of adult Americans are metabolically unhealthy. And so that is what triggered us to look at what does that mean?
Hmm.
What does uh, being metabolically unhealthy mean? And that is what triggered us to go back into looking at our clinical study and the evidence that we gathered. As I said, we collected a lot of data.
Hmm.
Until this point, we were very focused on the weight loss aspect of it. But given all of the body composition and other data that we collected, we went back to understand what are the benefits of that weight loss. And that's where going back into the data and looking at the data is what we then learned that we were actually able to see with our comprehensive approach a reduction in visceral fat, otherwise known as the bad fat. And we also know from existing scientific evidence that too much of that visceral fat is uh, is not good for
Hmm.
metabolic health because it contributes to inflammation, it contributes to insulin
Yeah.
resistance, or decreases an individual's insulin sensitivity. and it contributes to metabolic dysfunction. So that was some what we saw when we went back into the data was
Mhm.
that we saw a 14% reduction in visceral fat
Yeah.
through our comprehensive approach. The other thing that we learned was that we, with our, although we saw weight loss with
Mhm.
our comprehensive approach, we saw that that weight loss was predominantly coming from fat loss.
Okay.
So we were able to preserve that lean mass. And lean mass, as I mentioned, is more than 50% of it is made up of muscle,
Mhm.
and that contributes to that active metabolism.
Yeah.
So again, connecting the reduction in the visceral fat, retaining that lean mass and preserving and protecting that healthy muscle, all of those are working together to help support metabolic health. So this is the exciting part, given the bigger issue of metabolic
Yeah.
dysfunction and what individuals are facing, and seeing that our comprehensive program can have an impact in addressing that, is one of the reasons why we are talking more about this these new data.
So one thing you mentioned that stood out to me is you said that more than 90% of people are metabolically unhealthy. So how do we know we're metabolically unhealthy? I think that's something a lot of people are very curious about.
Yeah, great question. And I can answer that question in two ways.
Okay.
From a clinical perspective or a healthcare perspective, when we say someone is metabolically unhealthy or has metabolic dysfunction, we look at certain biomarkers. For
Mhm.
example, we look at their blood cholesterol levels, we look at their body fat composition, we look at their blood glucose levels, and many other risk factors. So
Mhm.
that's the more clinical aspect of metabolic
Okay.
dysfunction. On the individual level, as an individual, the way I feel
Mhm.
is another way to think about metabolic dysfunction. When someone has a metabolic dysfunction, they may have low energy, they may
Mhm.
feel less vital,
Yeah.
the vitality is decreased, they may have something like less focus.
Okay.
So, overall, energy is impacted, and
Yeah.
how they feel is impacted in the negative way. And so, that's another way to think about metabolic dysfunction.
That makes sense. I think you explaining that can help a lot of people look inward and really see if that is something they are struggling with and then address it if needed.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the three pillars of metabolic synchronization. Can you please go through them and explain them?
Yeah, so metabolic synchronization, as I mentioned before, is about helping to address that root cause of metabolic dysfunction
Mhm.
and helping to reverse metabolic dysfunction and taking individuals towards positive or optimal
Okay.
metabolic health. So, based on our clinical study and the new data that we were able to find, there are three key pillars of metabolic synchronization. One is that reduction in visceral fat or the bad fat. In our clinical study, we saw a 14% reduction in visceral fat. By reducing that visceral fat, we are able to help reverse some of these disruptions that are happening
Mhm.
metabolically. For example, we are able to help improve um, insulin resistance, or improve individuals as to how they regulate their blood glucose levels. That's just one example. Studies have shown that it helps improve blood pressure, and so essentially meaning that the reduction in visceral fat has positive effects on metabolic function.
Mhm.
The second pillar is retention of lean mass. In our clinical study, we saw that 98% of lean mass was retained. So there we are able to preserve that lean mass.
Yeah,
And again, and by preserving that lean mass, we are protecting healthy muscle.
that's huge.
That is
Yeah.
huge, because preserving healthy muscle and protecting healthy muscle is important, because muscle is a metabolically very active organ and
Right.
tissue. It has these, what we call the powerhouses of the cell, the mitochondria,
Mhm.
that are the generating energy. So the
Yeah.
more muscle you have, the more efficient your body is going to be in using energy,
Mhm.
and less fat is being preserved. And so we need more muscle. And
Yeah.
so preserving and protecting that muscle is an important aspect, another important aspect of helping to reverse the metabolic dysfunction.
So how do you know if you're metabolically unhealthy?
Great question. As a healthcare professional, we look at different biomarkers
Hmm.
to determine the metabolic health of an individual. Well, there are a couple of key ones that I want to highlight. One of them is blood pressure.
Yeah.
Elevated blood pressure is an indication of metabolic dysfunction.
Okay.
The second one that I want to highlight is elevated blood cholesterol levels and
Hmm.
elevated triglycerides, or otherwise known as blood fat.
Hmm.
When they're high, that again is an indication of metabolic dysfunction.
Okay.
The third one that I want to highlight is, and this is a combination of blood glucose and insulin,
Okay.
how the body is regulating blood glucose and insulin levels. Indicates whether an individual is insulin resistant or insulin sensitive. We want people to be more insulin sensitive. And so we look at both of those in combination. And if someone is insulin resistant, that's another indication of metabolic dysfunction.
So if I wanted to get into metabolic synchronization, is that just weight loss or is there more to it? I think I know the answer, but I would love for you to explain.
Yeah, great question. When we think about metabolic synchronization, we're thinking about it beyond weight loss. Weight loss is still important, don't get me wrong, and healthy quality weight loss is definitely important in terms of reversing metabolic dysfunction.
Yeah.
But what we are looking at is healthy quality weight loss
Mm.
and improvements in body composition, which is where that reduction in visceral fat, preserving the lean mass, and protecting the healthy muscle come into play. By having healthy body composition,
Mhm.
you can help in terms of reversing that metabolic dysfunction and moving more towards active metabolic health.
Gotcha. That makes sense. So you also have earlier mentioned lean mass and muscle protection. So I would love to know what the difference between the two are because they do sound somewhat similar, but we love for you to explain.
So lean mass is, you can think about lean mass as the umbrella when we think about anything that is in our body that is not fat. Okay, and so lean mass essentially is looking at all the total mass in the body as it relates to the different organs, different soft tissues in the body, and certain fluids. It does not include fat and it does not include bone. So lean mass includes muscle. Muscle is a
Okay.
key component of lean mass. More than 50% of lean mass is muscle.
Yeah.
So when we talk about lean mass, that's what we are talking about. We're talking about all of those different tissues. And when we did our study, we evaluated the body composition
Mhm.
using a technology called DEXA, which is
Okay.
essentially taking the full body scan,
Yeah.
X ray scan of the body. And so the DEXA measures lean mass. And based on that, we were able to show that 98% of the lean mass was retained while people were losing weight.
Wow.
So, um, and as I said, muscle makes up a significant part of the lean mass.
Mhm.
So when we are retaining lean mass, we are protecting that muscle because you're not losing that muscle. And that's what it means.
Okay. That makes so much sense. And then can you explain scientifically why retaining lean mass and reducing visceral fat matters so much for your metabolic health?
Yeah. So visceral fat or the bad fat, it has negative effects in terms of metabolic health. It causes metabolic disruptions.
Yeah.
It causes imbalances in how the body regulates blood glucose, uh, and how the body regulates blood lipids or the triglycerides, and contributes to chronic health conditions. uh, on the flip side, retaining lean mass is because you're protecting that healthy muscle, you're maintaining that it's contributing to more active metabolism and
Mhm.
more better energy utilization and energy balance. And so by decreasing the visceral fat, you're helping to lower the risk of some of these risk factors that contribute to chronic health conditions.
Okay.
Whereas by helping to preserve and retain lean mass and protect the healthy muscle, you're contributing to more active metabolism. So you're decreasing the bad things and you're supporting the positives.
Okay, that's all for today's episode. A big thank you to Dr. J, President of Scientific and Clinical Affairs, for breaking down the science of metabolic synchronization in a way that we can all understand. Remember, it's not just about the number on the scale, it's about getting your metabolism back in rhythm, losing the right kind of fat, retaining lean mass, and protecting muscle that helps you stay strong and healthy. If you found this helpful, share it with someone who's curious about metabolic health, and stay tuned for more insights on how to support your body from the inside out. Thank you for listening, and thank you so much, Dr. J, for joining me today.
Thank you, Liz.